right, everyone, as folks are filing in, thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm very excited for this talk with Eleanor Finley. My name is Rob. Use he, him pronouns. I am the development coordinator for the Institute for Social Ecology. This has been a long time in the coming, this book talk, so I want to thank you all for being here tonight. For those who don't know, the Institute for Social Ecology is a radical institute for popular education for a free and ecological society. Founded in 1974 by Dan Chodorkoff and Murray Bookchin, the ISC has over 50 years on the left experimenting with ideas, practices, and movements. Today, our work is primarily focused on education programming online. But just yesterday, we announced our 2025 in-person summer intensive is going to be held in Lexington, Kentucky, from August 2nd to August 8th. So put that on your calendars, and follow us online and subscribe to our email list to get more updates. We're going to be doing a book talk. I'm going to say a few quick introductory words and then turn things over to Eleanor, and then we're going to have a Q&A section, so please put questions in the chat throughout this talk, and we'll kind of keep track of those, and then we'll kind of use the chat to facilitate Q&A and keep stacks. So yeah, we'll turn it over to them. But I've been excited about this event for a long time. Eleanor Finley has been involved with the ISC for about 15 years now, I think, or about then.
That's a scary number, but yeah, I think it's accurate. Yeah.
Yeah. And just to pull Eleanor's bio from the book posting on the Pluto Press website, Eleanor Finley is a researcher at University of Massachusetts, an associate at the Institute for Social Ecology, and an affiliated researcher at George Mason University Next System Studies. She has published numerous articles on social ecology related themes such as Kurdish democratic confederalism, energy and environmental justice, and degrowth, and conducted dozens of workshops, talks, and lectures to diverse audiences in North America and Europe. She lives in Fairfax, Virginia. Yeah, this book introduces and expands social ecology theory for a whole new audience. It's exactly the type of book we need in these times of uncertainty, as the fascist administration in the United States is rapidly escalating the poly crisis. While there is no meaningful opposition defending the status quo, let alone advancing the types of social change that are needed to address the problems we face, social ecology offers a realistic vision for a revolutionary path forward, combining both a rational analysis and a utopian vision for the future that should be, as Murray Bookchin would say. As more and more people realize that the system is fundamentally broken and that there's no going back to the illusion of stability, which itself rested on vast exploitation, racism, patriarchy, war, colonialism, ecological destruction, and more, we need new visionaries to show us a possible way forward. Eleanor is one of those visionaries. Her book is approachable for a general audience without sacrificing complexity. At a time when we need radical solutions, this book offers a glimpse into the types of movements that are already building the future in the present. It has been a pleasure for me to read it, and I know many people in my community who I'll be sharing it with. So I want to thank you all again for coming tonight, and like you all, I am looking forward to hearing from Eleanor, so please join me in giving her a warm welcome. Thank you all so much. I'm going to turn it over to Eleanor.
Yay. Thank you so much, Rob. I'm really touched by your introduction. This book has been a long time in the making through this community, and I'm just so indebted to the Institute and you and everyone who's a part of it in a myriad of ways. So this is really a treat for me today to be talking about this book with folks at the Institute. And yeah, it just feels very, my heart feels very full. And it also feels a little bit surreal talking to everyone here in our current political context. I remember coming to the ISE back in 2010, just a little bit before the Occupy Wall Street movement happened. It was 2010 that I first started reading Social Ecology and started really building a friendship with Haya Heller in Western Massachusetts. I was a part of a reading group that she was leading at the time. And at the time, these ideas felt very far-fetched to most people. They seemed idealistic, overly nitpicky, maybe about the system, and sort of hopelessly utopian and impractical. That word got thrown around all the time. And I think it still probably gets thrown around quite a bit, but it was way more prevalent then that these ideas were called impractical and they were dismissed. And now we're seeing the veil being pulled off of the right in this country, and also to a certain extent, the veil being pulled off of the center, and even to a certain extent, the progressive left, right? Like even to a certain extent, democratic socialism we're seeing is not able to offer the solutions that we've hoped or were promised. And very suddenly, we're thrust into a position right now where many, many people are looking for real alternatives, looking for solutions that cut to the root of our societal crisis, and also looking for ways of understanding what the hell is going on and how we've gotten into such deep shit. Pardon my language there. It's hard to phrase it any other way. How has humanity come to the point where we're at the brink of destroying our biosphere? I shouldn't even say the brink. We're actively destroying our biosphere. We're actively losing all of the things about our society and culture, or many of the things about our society and culture that we love and appreciate. AI machines are making art while people are being forced to pick up trash and getting paid very little for it. So this particular moment is very scary, and also in some ways, I know I'll hesitate to say exciting, but I am very heartened when I see folks like you all here having conversations about what we can do to come together in a deep way, to have real democracy, to have real sustainability, and to have an economy that works for everyone and not just the 1% of the 1%. So thank you all for being here today. This really means a lot to me, again, to be talking with folks from the ISE and just to be speaking with you all. So I'm going to share my screen. I have some slides for everyone. This book very much comes out of the Institute. As Rob mentioned, I started being involved with the ISE around 2010, 2011. And hang on just a second while I share my screen. Okay, so this should go. There we go. That's better. So this book is really a product of my involvement with the Institute, which began in the era of Occupy Wall Street. So I was very involved in Occupy Wall Street. And when Zuccotti Park happened, I was like, I have to go there. So I was in New York for a number of weeks in the fall of Actually, I was there for a weekend in the fall, and then I was there for several weeks in the spring of 2012 at that time. And I was just blown away by the fact that social ecology seemed to be unfolding before my very eyes, right? I'd been studying these politics of direct democracy, and suddenly here there were thousands of people coming to practice them. And that for me was a completely life-changing experience, and set the trajectory of all of my future work, because it was clear to me that these were not just nice ideas, they're not just abstractions, but rather there is something in the human spirit that called out for assembly, and that we really, as human beings, call out to each other. And social ecology is an expression of that. And I found, certainly at that time, and I think even more so today, that social ecology articulates that desire within us, in a way that we can put words to this yearning that we have for freedom, for justice, and for a better world. So this is the cover of my book, Practicing Social Ecology, From Bookchin to Rojava and Beyond. I was really privileged to work with Pluto Press, who are based in London. They're one of the oldest socialist presses. And even me getting in touch with them was an outgrowth of movement work. Marina Citrin from SUNY Binghamton, who you may have heard of, reached out to me to work on a project about mutual aid around the world. And together with many people around the world, we pulled a book together called Pandemic Solidarity. And through working on pandemic solidarity, I got in touch with folks at Pluto. And at that time, the pandemic had really turned my life upside down. I was doing research for my doctorate in anthropology, which I'm actually wrapping up right now. But at the time, I was doing ethnographic research with Kurdish migrants in London. And I was working on a more conventional academic doctorate, a more conventional ethnographic project. And the COVID pandemic completely exploded that. It was no longer possible to do research. And so I pivoted and said, hey, wait a minute, this is what I actually really want to be doing. If we're going to get culled by a deadly infectious disease, I might as well work on the thing that I actually really care about. And so I started working on this book, which, as Rob mentioned, is an introduction to the ideas of social ecology. I wanted to write something that people could understand without having had a college degree, or a master's degree or a PhD, and something that folks could understand without having intricate knowledge of social movements. What I found as I talked to people about social ecology and Bookchin's work in my own sort of life experiences, research, and activism was that people were really excited about Marie's work, but a lot of folks found it inaccessible, like just the language, the way it was written, or difficult in terms of the history and the references that were being made, a lot of the philosophical references, and also just kind of out of date, right? Marie really stopped writing by the early 2000s, and here we are in 2025 in a very different context. So as I was formulating this idea, I felt like I had this thing inside me that needed to come out. That was one really major concern. And then another was thinking through these questions about, well, how are these ideas actually practiced? That was another question that I encountered all of the time from people. Like they would say, okay, well, this sounds really great, but what does it actually look like in practice? And I think that's still a very good question, and we should keep asking it. But I ended up writing this book because I was like, I really would much rather just hand somebody something like a book or a pamphlet to be able to say, here, this is how folks are practicing these ideas. Yeah, so those are just some of the things that went into the book. I hope you guys can see my whole screen and it's not getting covered by Zoom stuff. Yeah, cool. So this book is kind of a hybrid genre. Like I said, it's in some ways it's scholarly and academic. I think certainly someone outside the academy might read it and be like, all right, this is a little bit dense, it's a little bit academic. But it's also really it's also in some ways a work of history, which I'll get to in a second. And it's also using what's called ethnography, which is just a fancy way of saying going places and meeting people and writing about your experiences, and really trying to focus on how your friends and compatriots and the people you're working with see the world. So it's necessarily a collective and collaborative process. In writing this book, I wasn't trying to say like, this is social ecology and I'm coming down from the mountain and telling you what this is. But rather I was trying to bring together a lot of different voices to give their perspective on social ecology, and start to really connect different movements in a constellation. So I have here, this book is really about using ethnography to capture an ongoing conversation and ask critical questions about social ecology praxis. So I mentioned this question that kept coming up, people asking, well, how are these ideas actually being put into practice? In order to sort of put the book together, I invoked the notion of praxis, very close to practice, but praxis means action that's informed by theory, right? And then theory that is then informed by action, right? So there's a conversation between theory and action, and social ecology is very much a product of that conversation. And what I really wanted to see was pushing that aspect of social ecology forward. I noticed that there's a lot written about the theory, but not so much written about the practice component. So today, what I'm going to talk about, I'm already sort of diving into things, but I wanted to share a little bit about the different nodes in this conversation. One metaphor that I use in the introduction of the book that comes up for me again and again as I think about this project is that of a constellation. And in my head, I was really sort of seeing this constellation between the social ecology movement that's come out of the work of Murray Bookchin and his milieu. And in the book, I really wanted to characterize that as a social movement and not just as one person. But even that is just sort of one node. Rojava obviously is another one. I'll get to that in just a moment. And then there are other elements in this constellation of social movements. But regarding social ecology and the work coming from Bookchin, folks in the 1960s, B. Bookchin, folks like Nestor King, Haya Heller, Brian Tokar, Dan Choderkov, all the folks that we, hear and know and love at the Institute for Social Ecology. They were really part of creating a world in which these ideas could flourish. And what I've encountered when talking about particularly Bookchin's work in the world is that a lot of people don't know that he was an activist and a revolutionary and had a very rich milieu of people around him. And I think that's a common misperception of ideas in general. But it's very important on the left that we understand that revolutionary ideas come out of revolutionary context. And it really does take a village. And Murray was not alone when he crafted these ideas. He himself was bringing together many, many different perspectives. So I touch on that in the book. There's so much that I edited out. I really wish I could have done more in terms of like the history of social ecology in the book. My publisher actually told me to like cut some stuff out. I initially wanted like a whole chapter on social ecology history. There's so much work here to be done. If anybody is interested in pulling on some of these threads and themes, because also a lot of this history is being lost. We haven't been the best historians in the last 50 years of social movements. And I've noticed that young people today, I include myself in this, aren't always the best at seeking out history. Like we don't know a lot of the social movement history that's there, and we think it doesn't exist. And often you'll talk to people about the amazing things that were going on at Goddard, or were going on the Lower East Side, and their jaws will kind of drop and they'll be like, whoa, I didn't know this happened. So this is really one node in the constellation I was trying to pull out. And I want to say thank you to the Institute for Social Ecology and also the Bookchin Trust for allowing me to access images, also use a couple of images in the text. This is really like such a treat working on these sections of the book. And I just want to quickly flag over here on the left the Seneca scholar, John Mohawk, who was a close collaborator of Murray's in the 1970s and 1980s. And just, bringing in an Indigenous perspective to his ideas, I think was really, really critical. And not just John, but other Indigenous folks in the region at the time, like the folks in the Ramapo Nation. I think I see one or two folks in the audience here who were there at the time. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about the Institute for Social Ecology and the New Alchemy Institute that were really in close collaboration with Indigenous folks in the Northeast. So another major node in this constellation is obviously the Rojava Revolution. So for folks who don't know, the Rojava Revolution is a movement among Kurdish people in Southeast Turkey and Northeast Syria. Rojava is actually technically Northeast Syria, but I think it's important to include Southeast Turkey as well. And this is a movement for Kurdish and multi-ethnic autonomy in these regions. It is a feminist movement for women's liberation. It is an ecological movement for close integration with the land and stopping exploitation of the land. It is a socialist movement in the sense that they're working with a solidarity economy. And again, it's a multi-ethnic movement, meaning that it is actively anti-racist and is working to combat the nationalistic and right-wing and often genocidal elements in the region. And the Rojava Revolution has been greatly inspired by Murray's work through a leader and philosopher named Abdullah Öcalan, who actually, you can see his image here on a mural in a autonomously run refugee camp in Greece called Campo Lavrio. This whole compound here, and this is just one wing, is an autonomously, collectively run space for people who are fleeing from the Syrian civil war. The camp was recently shut down, but it's just an example of this remarkable movement and how transnational it is. I don't have time today to really go into depth about the Rojava Revolution, but that's why I encourage you to read the book, because it's going to talk about that a lot more, and also touch on some of the really important thinkers that come out of this movement, like Abdullah Öcalan, also like Dilar Dirick. And this, in many ways, I think is the most promising revolutionary movement in the world today. And it has close ties to social ecology. So this is sort of in my constellation. This is one of the other stars in the constellation. And just for the sake of sharing, you know, the experiences that I had that went into the book, I also put this painting here from a Kurdish activist named Zara Doğan, who completed this painting, as well as many, many others, from prison in Southeast Turkey. She's remarkable. She's been in and out of prison for her paintings, for her work, depicting the Kurdish struggle. I highly recommend you check her out. And I took this picture while at a festival about her work in Brittany, France. So this is just to highlight, again, how international this movement is, and how international, therefore, the social ecology movement is. Another important node that shows up in the book in this constellation is the municipalist movement, which comes out of Southeast, primarily out of out of Southwest Europe, in the Iberian Peninsula. This is coming out of the Occupy movement, which was called the 15M, or the Indignados movement, in Spain. And here folks have taken the concept of taking back the city and public space as the center of their revolutionary politics. And folks have really worked to create urban movements that are about reviving the social ecology of their cities. And so this was another node here. You see influence from Murray's work and from the social ecology movement here in a lot of different ways. Murray obviously coined the term libertarian municipalism back in the 1970s. Municipalismo, I believe, has an independent origin. And I say this having gone to Barcelona and talked to people, and that's my best guess, is that there's this independent genesis for the term municipalismo. And yet there's also a lot of importance and influence given to Murray's work. And then at the same time, Murray himself was inspired by the Spanish anarchists and the radicalism of Barcelona, and the sort of rethinking the meaning of the city that comes out of Iberian radical movements. So the constellation that I'm describing here is not one way at all. It's not just, oh, Murray came up with these ideas, they spread around the world and people implemented them. In fact, you know, he's influenced by many different folks, and then his influence is going out, and then it's also resonating back, right? We can also see that the Rojava Revolution has had profound impacts on social ecology here in the United States and elsewhere, Turtle Island, not the United States. I'm probably taking up more time than I want. I'm feeling myself getting tired, and I can imagine other folks might be feeling tired too. But some of the other nodes here, and again, I think they're important, so so I want to take some time to talk about them, is Indigenous perspectives, right? I wanted to write a introduction to social ecology that was taking contemporary Indigenous perspectives into account and taking Indigenous perspectives seriously. I think this has been often like a source of tension or different opinions in the social ecology movement. I know some folks say Bookchin really romanticized Indigenous people, which I think is true in part. But then there's also been an overcorrective where Indigenous perspectives have really been kind of erased and we don't talk about them. When in fact, what we're seeing globally is a movement for Indigenous resurgence all over the world, especially Latin America. We're seeing it in Canada, again, the United States, again, Turtle Island, right? Like the very geographies that we use to describe the land that we're on is influenced by the state. And Indigenous movements and scholars have been challenging this in a very deep way. And Murray was fundamentally influenced by Indigenous peoples. And I think the social ecology movement continually goes back to Indigenous perspectives as a touchstone, right? So this brings up kind of questions again about what is social ecology? What are the boundaries of social ecology? What are the relationships between Western and non-Western perspectives? What's social ecology's role in that? I can't pretend to offer the concrete answers on these questions, but I wanted to present a book that was taking them into account and raising them. After our talk today, I can certainly send out the slides to folks. I like having nice images on slides and then just the source of those images. This one is from a really wonderful article called When Whales Talk to Humans, and it's about Arctic peoples and the whale hunt and the participatory relationship that Indigenous peoples have with whales in the North. And then lastly, the science around that. Today, we're seeing more and more science speaking to the agency of non-humans, the sociality of animals, and some of these ideas that Murray had in the 1970s that seemed very far-fetched to most folks at the time, we're now understanding there's real scientific, backing to them, right? And so I wanted to take that into account. I've got just a few more here. In this book, you'll also see touched on, you'll see permaculture projects touched on. This is an important part of the praxis of social ecology. And permaculture is really just one node, right? There's all kinds of elements of ecological design, organic agriculture that came out of the Institute in its early decades. And really the Institute for Social Ecology itself was a part of a constellation of projects around the Northeast of the United States, but also in many other places, also in Australia. I have a book by a really interesting scholar named Stuart Hill, who uses the framework of social ecology to look at human and non-human systems. And here, social ecology really appears as a methodology for research and for understanding. And I wanted to flag this in the book really to show that there's a material dimension to this as well. And to remind readers that we can't have democracy without the material changes as well, right? We have to have a solidarity economy. We have to have real meaningful reintegration of society with the natural world. And I think that's a part of what makes social ecology unique. You know, it's not just calling for direct democracy, it's also calling for a holistic reintegration of society and nature. Oh, and I'll flag here in the pictures. This is Lisa DiPiano, who appears in the book pretty extensively. I had a really wonderful series of interviews with her, detailing her experiences as a global justice activist in the 1990s, and then becoming a permaculture practitioner. And she really reflects on the successes and a lot of the things that her and her community learned along the way in that process, and then also some of the limitations. So there's really exciting stuff in that book. This picture, or in that chapter, this picture here on the left is from a project that she did in New York City, where she was building public spaces, and you see again the integration of natural and social ecosystems through space. And then lastly, another node in the book, although this doesn't feature as prominently as Rojava or the municipalist movement in Spain, is the notion of Pan-African social ecology coined by Modibo Kadali and Black liberation struggles. So something that I found as I was doing research for this book and also in my own activism was that the politics of direct democracy and federalism have very strong roots in the US South through the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and other civil rights organizations. And those themselves have roots in West African traditions, and that there's a continuous line between people who we might see as indigenous in West Africa, many of whom were in particular ecologies, in watersheds, in the river systems in West Africa, and very closely involved with rice farming. And subsequently were outside of the immediate influence of empires farther inland in Central Africa. And these groups really had a strong liberatory culture that fed into the Caribbean and the US South, and subsequently into Black liberation struggles today. So I think there's often a perception that Black liberation struggles have been exclusively top-down, highly disciplined, authoritarian even. And what we're seeing today, more and more voices from Black liberation struggles, seeing that that's really not true. That hasn't been true in the past, and it's certainly not true today. So there's been a lot of really exciting folks writing about this, and I wanted to touch on that as well in the book. So I threw some questions up here. I like ending presentations with questions. That's sort of what I have for you guys today. I know I'm blathering a lot about basically just stuff that I think is cool and what went into the book for me. Although the book itself is structured quite differently than what I showed you just now. The book is structured according to practice. So thinking about assemblies, federations, building ecological communities. So it's kind of drawing on all of the different examples I just showed you and reconfiguring them. But since this was the Institute for Social Ecology, I thought I could nerd out a little bit. So I appreciate you guys, going on that journey with me. And as we come back into conversation, I know it's 6:43. Okay, so actually I'm not so bad on time. It's been about 40 minutes. Some questions I have for you all, although I'm sure you have questions for me too, is where do we see social ecology going in the future? Like that's something that I was left with as I finished out this project. Um, what do we get out of seeing social ecology as Bookchin, or what do we get out of a more expansive view? I think there's actually trade-offs. I think the expansive view is really helpful in a lot of ways, but also there's an integrity to Bookchin's work that's really useful and important and unique, that's worth examining as well. Even if his work is, limited, or we see contradictions in the light of, the insight of the last decades. But I think there's, again, there's advantages to both. And then how can we push the praxis of social ecology forward? I imagine that the folks I'm talking to right now have a lot invested in the praxis of social ecology. You have your own projects. And I think what is useful coming out of this book for people who are in that place of you're already doing the work, is first to raise this question of like, what is our praxis? What has been working? What hasn't been working? And then also, again, just having a piece that you can share with friends who don't really know much about these ideas. And again, I can't pretend like it's 100% accessible all of the time. But I'm really hoping that it can help broaden the audience of social ecology, because we really need everyone on deck to participate in building a new society. And we have to do it in a pluralistic way. So on that piece of having a more expansive view, I think it's not even so much of calling everything social ecology, so much as it is understanding how there's a movement of movements happening, and how can we be a part of that in a way where we're working with each other as equals. So I'll leave it there and pass it back to Rob. And thank you all again.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. That was so amazing. And yeah, so much there. And it's always a pleasure to hear from you, as you always
I know it's
forward such insightful perspectives. And yeah, so I think we can get started with some Q&A. So folks want to start putting questions in the chat, or if you want to call on folks, Eleanor. But I mean, I have a few questions myself, but I guess we can
yeah, I mean, I see I'm going to use your screen name, but Jagar Jagar6 asking about, being, or not asking about, mentioning that we can be expansive while honoring Bookchin's contributions, and wanting to see a radical labor movement having more overlap with social ecology. I think that's actually really critical. I know Rob has a lot to say about that. It's something that doesn't appear very robustly in the book, and I can't, I wish there was more. I also had a pretty strict word limit. So that was one reason that it just kind of didn't make the cut. But also, I think to some extent, it's also my own blind spot a little bit as well. Although I do mention it a little bit, but folks like Rob have a really developed perspective. And yeah, I definitely see that as a part of the future of social ecology as well. Okay, Jessica, yay, we have a name. So Jessica also has a question. I also see Zachary in the chat, and then Rodrigo has his hand raised. Do we want to do a quick stack? Does that make sense?
Sure. How about we go how about we can go Zach, then Rodrigo, then Jessica, then Scott.
So Zach wrote in their question, which is if I could talk a little bit about the chapter where I talk about Bookchin and the study group. So that's chapter 2, right? Right. Hang on. Let me, before I say that and give you the wrong information. So that's actually in chapter 3. And that ended up being a section. I initially wanted it to be a whole chapter because it was crucial to convey that in the history of social ecology, mentorship has been central. And since I started working on this book, the ISE mentorship program has been going strong, which is very exciting. And that element of revolutionary politics is often overlooked. I think way too often overlooked. That it often takes really intensive work with people who've been in the struggle. And so I do characterize Bookchin's own story being mentored by the German emigre Joseph Weber. I mean, I won't go into too much detail because that's why you should, read the book, and then also follow up on Murray's biography. But yeah, study groups and mentorship have been really central to social ecology and also central to other revolutionary movements. So I talk a bit about study groups in the Rojava Revolution and how social ecology and other revolutionary ideas have circulated in study groups in the Kurdish liberation movement for decades. They didn't just pop out of the sky fully with this like very developed theoretical perspective all at once. They studied and continue to study, often under really terrible conditions in prisons. And so I think that also helps debunk the prejudice that we have against study and intensive theoretical work in the West. We say like, oh, armchair activists, da, da, da. But in reality, people who get the most done are effective because they know how to direct their action because they've been directing their praxis using theory and using study groups. I see there are a couple of other hands. Rodrigo, would you like to go?
Yeah. Hi. I just want to do a quick comment. I'm a student at Austin, Texas, and I was at a local bookstore, Alienated Majesty, and they had a copy of your book. I
Oh,
wasn't
wow.
familiar with the Social Ecology Institute. I wasn't familiar with the Social Ecology or Murray Bookchin, or I haven't read the book yet either, but it's been kind of sitting on my nightstand and
So you just came across the book in a bookstore?
yes, exactly. I mean, I'm shocked. I mean, they have amazing works. Like I find like Edward Glissant, like just like very specific. I don't know, just like theoretical works there. Their curation is amazing. But I don't know who put this in the bookstore, but I'm thanking them a lot. And I just wanted to say like I don't know, I just wanted to leave a comment kind of saying that like yeah, like the message. I think there is a need for this kind of discourse to leave academic spaces, and that making something like this is really important. And that there actually is a big audience for this, and especially I would say in the online left. Like there's a really large audience of people who are looking for material like this to kind of just dig into. And so the more you can get the word out there, I think there's a big demand for it. It's just like finding the audience. But yeah, like I mean, I saw this in a bookstore. Great cover, by the way. And
Oh, thank you. I actually, I hope my publisher doesn't see this, but they know. I was like, when I first thought, I was like, oh, I don't really like it, but
no, that's what caught me. I mean, but yeah, no, like I think like just putting it out there, I think it's really, really important work. And I mean, since then I've been looking at grad school for a minute now, and I've been looking at different programs in urban planning and like community work and organizations. So it's just yeah, it's helpful to have like a very intro piece that can reach people who are outside of the academy, I would say. Because yeah, even though I'm in it, it can kind of even still feel daunting to kind of get into alternative, you know, social movements.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. It's really touching um to know that that's how you encountered the book. Just like at a bookstore, and also like you're exactly the kind of person that I wrote this for, you
Exactly.
know.
Which is, I
Um,
kind of got the feeling listening to the lecture. It was perfect.
yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. I feel like I was like a little bit like shy imposter syndrome. But yeah, I mean, I've also found that there's a lot of hunger for ideas like this and kind of smaller packaging. Like something that I actually really appreciate about the book is it's relatively cheap. It's like $20,
Yeah.
which is like, manageable, whereas like an academic book is like, can be 80 or 100 even for something that's, not that big and dense. um I have a lot more to say on this, but hopefully, my some of my contact information can go out, and we can like be in touch. Also, I'm teaching a class with the Institute for Social Ecology right now, and I'll be doing more work. Um, but yeah, thank you so much. I'm gonna call on Scott, and then I'm gonna let Jessica jump in. And Jessica, feel free to unmute yourself when it's your turn, or if you want to use the chat, that's also fine.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Eleanor, and congrats on the new book. Um, so I did come with a question, but I thought of sort of a comment based on the questions that you posed, and maybe I could share that or just sort of see if anybody has any feedback about it. But about the future of social ecology, I think that in today's conversation, we have a sort of a vision of the social ecology we wish to practice and kind of that liberatory horizon, the political economy we have in mind. But I think as sort of a um, point of entry for sort of connecting with people in the community, I feel like an important part about its future is maybe tapping into kind of the loneliness crisis that people are experiencing, a way to sort of bridge isolation, just joking like go out and touch grass. And I feel like that is sort of an important facet here that is kind of just a way to touch people, where they are in their lives, and sort of an exciting way of kind of working towards this future. So that's where I was saying maybe just my comment there to leave it there.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. I found as I was writing the introduction, I kept coming back to these themes about like loneliness and despair and like and I'm very much not immune like to these issues, and it's interesting putting something out there that folks find inspiring, because then you go back and look at your phone and it's like the polycrisis again. And I use that term polycrisis in the book. It's really kind of just a shorthand for like this bucket of shit that we have. Haya Heller at the Institute calls it the laundry list of pain. That's what like we used to, because we used to write flyers and stuff, and it would be like, capitalist, heterosexist, patriarchal, racist, colonial, like, like the whole thing. And it was like the laundry list of, all of the forms of hierarchy. But yeah, the piece about reaching people and just like even just asserting that there is another future that we could have that's not a dystopian nightmare is itself a big it's a very rare thing. And I, in some sense, for this book, I can't really take credit for that. Like it just so happened to come out at this particular moment. But I really see all of us as a part of that that collective process. Just really quick, I'm seeing the name B in the chat, or not in the chat, in the group. I don't know if B Bookchin is here, but if she is, B, you're such an inspiration, and I'm honored that you're here, and just your work is so important. Getting back to the stack, Jessica had a comment. And then from there, I don't see any other hands raised, but I feel like folks should feel like welcome to jump in.
We have a few questions in the chat after Jessica.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Hey there. I'm very tired after work, so here I am.
Yeah.
I read your book. I loved it. First, before I get to my question, I just wanted to say a couple of things I really appreciated. I really appreciate that you included the contributions of African Black culture, histories, and resistance struggles. I loved, I have a tremendous amount of respect and love for Bookchin, and I've read his works, though it's very Eurocentric, which, maybe that's the perspective he's coming from, but it's really great that, and especially in the times we're in and the context we're in, that you are going beyond that, is really necessary. And it definitely, some of the African struggles you mentioned, or the writers or the movements I'm familiar with, and others I'm like, oh, I have this book on my, like the Pan-Africanism, is ecology. I forgot the exact name of it, but that book, I have it on my shelf, and I'm like, okay, I need to read that now.
Yeah.
And then I really appreciated, it was in the section of creating laying the groundwork. You deal with like the issue of emotional, we need to deal with our emotions, our traumas, the relationships we make that is the work. And I think I feel like that component, at least in the left spaces I've been in the past, which have been very male dominated, that gets as like liberal even, or a distraction from the real work, when, like you, pretty much so many organizations I've been a part of that fell apart have been because people haven't dealt with those things. So I really appreciate reading that. And then the last thing I want to say is obviously you have your section on popular assemblies and municipalism. This is an idea that's really exciting for me right now. And I guess, I don't know exactly what I'm asking, but like, how do we bring these ideas of government, democratic governance and economic democracy into these new burgeoning movements? Because while I love to see people are getting active and doing things, it's like, we can't afford to keep repeating the same mistakes, can't afford to just think we can just like reform the system. And I'm like, I almost want to brainstorm, like, how do we strategically popularize these ideas? How do we strategically spread political education? And I know this stuff like this is a part of it, but I think like a more like really deliberate strategy session of how we get these ideas out there could be beneficial.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And it's nice to see you. Yeah. And on the emotional piece in that chapter of laying the groundwork, I just wanted to express my own appreciation for that, because when I wrote that chapter and I put it first, I knew it would piss some people off. And I was scared about that. I was scared about folks like reading it and being like, oh, this is just like, like wishy-washy, like, woo-woo, whatever. And then, but as I continued to write it, I was like, oh no, this is actually really important. And then moreover, and I mentioned this in that chapter, is that the people that I talked to who had been doing this work, almost every single one of them mentioned that issue of like the internal work, right? That was often the language that the people use. Like, you have to do the internal work, because if you try to just like snap your fingers and have assemblies, it will not work. Like, it will be a complete shit show. And what a lot of, you know, again, really experienced folks, like again, Rojava, Barcelona, people who are really in the thick of revolution, were saying, like, we did this too fast, you know, or we're struggling. Like, even in Rojava, people were saying, like, we did this really fast, and now we're having to go back and like, and do that political education, like do the popular education. And these are folks who'd been really working intensively to do that popular education for 10 years, you know, 10, 15, 20 years. And that's what it takes. It's 10, 15, 20 years of concerted popular education before you can get people to a place where they're capable of being democratic with each other. And I think that's something that I really took out of this book as I was writing it and doing the research. Like, that point really was hit home for me, that like, oh, you really have to put the cart before the horse, because if you have just a bunch of damaged people coming together to like have an assembly, it's gonna, you know, it will completely go awry. And there's so much more I want to say about that. I think your question about like, how do we meet the moment right now and bring these ideas to people, is like, that's like the $1 million question right now. And we're not prepared, and we're not organized, and I don't know, it scares me a little bit. It sounds like there's some folks in the chat. I'm gonna let Rob sort of take that one away.
Yeah, I'll read the question. So I'm going to do Phil's question, and then I'm going to do Brandon's question. Then I'm going to go back to Zachary's question. So Phil asks, how can the principles of social ecology, as practiced in Rojava's democratic confederalism, be adapted and implemented in developed nations where growing oligarchic influence threatens democratic institutions and ecological sustainability?
Yeah, such a crucial question. I think it actually kind of comes back to what we were just talking about, which is that the lessons that come out of Rojava aren't so much like, oh, you have this democratic procedure, right? Or you organized assemblies in quite this way. It's not about having the right formula of a democratic structure. And I think that's kind of a Western bias that we have, is like, we think that there's, you know, we think that there's a magic system, you know, and if we just get that formula right, then we have, you know, everything like clicks into place. But in fact, the revolution in Rojava is a revolution in mentality, and it happens through relationships. And the extent to which they've been successful in the region has been not because they were like doing assemblies in the right way or organizing their economy even in the right way. It was that they were going door to door and talking to people face to face for 10, 15, 20 years. And if you go into the history of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, this is really clear. So not just in Rojava, but also in Southeast Turkey, where they have a really strong base. They weren't communicating with ordinary people through books or writing. They were communicating with people face to face, and they were going to towns and villages and meeting with families one-on-one. And they would continue to go back and talk to those families over and over and over again. So in a sense, what we're learning for what the oligarchic influence today, like we're in a far right context. I think the lesson from Rojava is that you have to deal with people who have those reactionary views over and over and over again. Like, revolutionary commitment is to talk to your neighbors over and over and over again, even if they're saying things that are racist, even if they're saying things that are fucked up, to have that revolutionary commitment to shift their perspective and bring them on board over the course of years, because that is how they did it. And again, they did it face to face, and they also did it with people who were very, very poor. I'll also say that with the the history of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, they were not going through people that they thought of as influential or intellectuals. They were working with the absolute, impoverished classes of society, and that's where their base is from. So I think that's another lesson for us. And this is one of these places where I can't pretend like I'm doing it well, but they really work, again, they work with people on a face-to-face level, starting from the absolute bottom. And I think there's a lot more there too, but I'll sort of leave my answer there.
Thank you. And the next question is, and I'll start to answer this a little bit, but are there any other social ecology resources you would recommend educators, and specifically in the field of education, teaching courses and looking for additional resources? Love the book. You mentioned earlier, thank you in advance. And I'll just make a plug for page 179 on the book, where Eleanor offers recommended readings. So I haven't put the link in the chat yet, but here is the link to the book, which I encourage you all to purchase if you had not done so yet, through Pluto Press, or if you call your local independent bookshop and ask them to order it for you. You won't have to pay for the shipping, and you can just pick it up at your local independent bookstore. But I can say Eleanor includes some readings on 179, but if you have some in specific that you'd like to add here, Eleanor, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Institute for Social Ecology actually has some really amazing article libraries and resources. There's not like an immediate library that sticks out to me, that's like immediately available for educators. It also depends on what level of education. I think there's a lot that's available to higher ed education, and someone in an undergraduate course, for example. It gets a lot harder when you're looking at primary education or folks who are going back to school as returning students. But there is a lot out there. I'm a little bit tired at the moment, so I can't be like, oh, there's XYZ. But Rob had a really great suggestion that, yeah, there's I put a list of recommended readings at the end of the book that are also with readability in mind, right? I would also look at some of the references, like in the at the end of there's like a section called notes, but it's just the bibliography. A lot of stuff here in the bibliography is a great way to follow up. So I hope that's useful. But I think this speaks to the need for like a resource library,
Yeah. Thank you. And I encourage folks to continue putting questions in the comments, in the comment section. I'm going to read Zachary's, and actually I kind of want to ask one of my own questions after that. So, and then I'll keep passing it. But Zachary wants to know, would also like to hear more about what you were saying about the gap in historical understanding of movements and research around social ecology movements, history specifically. Are there areas that you see a lot of potential for historical research?
Yeah, so one is Bookchin's biography. I think there's a lot of historical research on his life and the intellectual milieus that he was involved in that's really crucial and important. I think the juncture between the old left and the new left, and the sort of rethinking of hierarchy in the Soviet Union, stuff in the 1950s, like Herbert Marcuse. A lot of that's been talked about, but I think looking at what was going on in the Lower East Side and sort of anarchist resurgence is really important. The 1980s as well, I think, is a really crucial time. I think the Institute, actually, I've been a big advocate for this for a while. I think there can be a lot of historical research done on who was coming to the Institute, what was the Institute up to at various times. There were a lot of amazing people coming through the Institute for Social Ecology in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. And so there's really a lot there. Again, I'm a little bit tired, so it's hard to kind of like, you know, think of like, you know, really specific junctures. But, you know, when you talk to folks like Dan Choderkoff or Brian Tokar, you really get a sense of like, wow, there's a lot that happened that simply wasn't being recorded. Or like Paul McIsaac, you know, or B, I know she's worked with interviewers, I think, in the past. Burlington, Bernie, we need more historical research on what was going on in Burlington in the 1980s. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. I see Dr. Michael Dorsey has his hand raised, so maybe he can share. I recognize his name from ISC stuff and the global justice movement, and maybe he has some recommendations.
No, I was typing my question. I didn't know if the format was to type, but I can ask it. So one wonderful book. I got a copy.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I got a copy. It's wonderful. And I wasn't going to ask a question, except I want to ask it based on how you framed ethnography at the top. You know, and I offer this as an ethnographer, as a anthropologist. You know, we think of that. You know, maybe this is a too empirical, you know, notion, but that sort of description of the culture and social mores, as it were, of peoples and cultures. And I ask this because you offered a more, I'll call it lay notion of ethnography. And what I'm wondering is, ISE is ring fenced by what we might call in lay terms a milieu of trustafarians. Choderkoff's, Milstein, I'm forgetting her name, down in New York, a gaggle of them. And I'm wondering what that does to this sensibility. The first time I met Murray, and I liked him. People were still shocked. You know, he cussed me out and said environmental racism was nonsense and everything, and it was shouting as he normally does. I love that. Some people get shocked by that, triggered by that. I thought it was great. People were still asking me to this day. This was maybe 30 years ago that he just yelled at my face. But I'm wondering, what is that trustafarian sensibility? That seems to be a significant aspect of being able to promulgate these ideas, the political economy of those that are involved in this. I love your thoughts on that. And I'll anchor that by saying I love the book, and if you haven't got it, please get it. So I'm wondering about that in terms of the research, because that's what a lot of, I'll say, bourgeois, myself included, American liberals don't like to talk about. Who's got the cash, who's paying for what.
Yeah.
That's the sine qua non of this stuff I'll offer. Love your thoughts.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, this is such a big range of topics and issues. And I also want to acknowledge I totally skipped over Rob. And so we can definitely get to that after this. And I apologize for my cat who's like demanding attention. So, you know, I mean, I won't speak to individuals and how folks have been able to sustain their activism, and also how that's their class positionality has influenced that. I think that's a really important and broad topic to tackle, and also should be done within the context of how we're analyzing the broader political economy of the left, which is right. Excuse me, my cat Eddie. His name is Eddie. He's very sweet, but he's a little stubborn. This is such a serious topic because we run up into it all the time when it comes to the actual organizing, right? Is like, who has the say over funds? Who's able to actually do the work? Who has the luxury to sit and read or to pontificate or to go to conferences? I mean, I can say for my own positionality that I've been very fortunate and very lucky in many ways, particularly when it comes to like educational privilege. But also, I don't come from a background where my parents were able to support me going to private schools, or like my graduate career. I've made an embarrassingly little amount of money in my 10 years in graduate school. So, and I, grew up in part with a single mom, and, working, I started working when I was like 14. And that tension has been with me throughout my entire time on the left. And I think it does factor into how I wrote this book in the way that I did, because I did feel frustration about people not taking serious, what seemed to me is people not taking seriously enough the need to present these ideas in a way that people can understand if they weren't going to elite schools in the Northeast and we're all friends with each other. That's what I was seeing. Like, I grew up in Virginia. Like, I went to school in Richmond, Virginia, like Southern girl. Like, again, I've been very privileged in a lot of ways. I'm not trying to oversell, like I'm Miss, fucking working class, but I did feel alienated from this Northeast milieu, and that very much influenced me wanting to write this book, because I felt frustrated by some of those dynamics. And I kind of wanted to bring social ecology out of the Northeast, right? It's been kind of in this little silo up in the Northeast. But what we really need is a conversation that social ecology is a part of, but also not saying like, oh, social ecology is the be all end all, right? Because that also became very clear to me. It was like, actually the strongest traditions of direct democracy we have in this country, like they're in the US Southeast, like there's people's assemblies happening all over the US South right now. And social ecology has only sort of remote connections to them. So there's a lot to unpack there. But I do think that has been a significant part of how social ecology is sort of operated in the world, and we need to counteract some of those impacts.
Thank you. I see Rodrigo asked a question that I think I can just get to real quick, is what are the intersections of social ecology and humanities, anthropology, history, ethnography, sociology? I mean, it's all kind of part of social ecology. Murray Bookchin and subsequent social ecologists have drawn on all of those fields to build the theory of social ecology, as well as the natural sciences, feminism, physics. I mean, and just basically everything. Social ecology encompasses it's an extremely interdisciplinary field that relies on the findings of all these different fields and research done with it. I don't know if Bookchin's ever done ethnography, but he's definitely read people who did. Yeah. So I guess and then we are with only about 8 minutes left, so I'm reading a few folks' question, and kind of Jessica wants to think
And Rob,
about more about.
you should ask your question too.
Yeah. I mean, my question I want to ask was how your perspective on social ecology changed throughout the process of writing this book, and how your kind of thinking has evolved. And then I think Scott might put their question in the chat, but yeah, how about you address that? And we're kind of short on time, so thank you.
Yeah, I'll be brief, and then hopefully we can quickly get to Jessica's question that looks like somebody else sort of may have raised the theme as well. How my perspective on social ecology changed. One of them is that piece that I mentioned earlier about we have to do the internal work before going into assemblies. I had a sense of that as I was going into it, but that became really clear to me as I talked to more and more people. So this book was ethnographic in the sense that I was doing a lot of interviews. There's some ethnographic research that I incorporated, but as Dr. Dorsey mentioned, like, this isn't an ethnography in a strict sense. Like, an anthropologist would not consider this ethnography. It's ethnographic. It's ethnographically informed. But that piece about the internal, the mental and emotional labor to reconcile and become more harmonious with yourself and with your other close relationships, that was very clear to me as a piece of how we need to build, and to really take that much more seriously on a systemic level, right? Like throughout the movement. And we need to be much more vocal about talking about it in movement spaces, as opposed to it being after the meetings, or individuals, or again, often up to people who are feminized, up to women and non-binary folks to do the emotional labor. So that was one. Another, and I think this is kind of covered in the presentation that I did, is it became very clear to me that there's a kind of confluence and a formation around the principles of direct participatory democracy, or radically participatory democracy, ecology, feminism, ecology, feminism, sort of writ large, so like sexual and identity liberation, multiculturalism. There's a nexus around these notions, federalism, and that these notions, that nexus has appeared in multiple places at multiple times. And what I think that is a shift in human consciousness. Like, I think we're genuinely seeing that third nature shift all over the world and through many different idioms. It's not just social ecology. It's not just Bookchin. I do think as I was doing the research, it became clear to me that these ideas are popping up in parallel in many different places. And we have to be paying attention to that. And I do think that's how we have to characterize what's happening. Because if we're characterizing it as just this one genius came down from the mountain, it's always going to have a limited reach. And that truth of it being a parallel, like, way of thinking that's coming up in many different parts of the world is more powerful. I think that has a lot more integrity. It has a lot more strength to it, in knowing that we're really onto something. So that's really critical. The last thing worth mentioning, and I hate to leave dangling on this, I think the division that we make between direct democracy and representational democracy is not as clear cut as we wish it were. Like, once you start to really unpack federal system, like, the distinction between direct and representational democracy gets really blurry. And there's a lot of conceptual work moving ahead as we start to understand our own participatory systems better. Like, what is that in between, or other, between delegation and representation? It becomes really sticky really fast. So I'll leave it there, and hopefully we have a few minutes for, there was like one or two other things.
Yeah, there's a few questions that I think might need a little more time to get into. So I think I might well, I won't make another plug for your book, so I'm going to put the link again in the chat and encourage everyone to please go and buy this book. I think it's an extremely important contribution at this moment, and I also want to give you a chance, Eleanor, to say any concluding words to as we wrap up. And thank everyone for attending this talk, and please follow I'm going to put a link to sign up for the Institute for Social Ecology's email list so you can get updates when we do other events and classes, and open up the registration for our mentorship program, and remind folks that we're doing our intensive in August in Lexington, Kentucky, August 2nd to August 8th. And yes, stay tuned. And Eleanor, if you'll have any final comments to send us off with tonight.
Yeah, I actually want to quickly mention, so it looks like the last theme in the chat that we really didn't have time to get to was about labor and social ecology and the labor movement. I want to give a plug for Rob's work and thinking about these really urgent and important questions. And I would expect that to come up as a theme at the gathering or the intensive. Like look ahead, like stay tuned on Social Institute events this year, because I think that this is a really critical theme that's bubbling up right now, and a lot of folks are asking these questions. Again, it's not 100% my wheelhouse, which is why I don't have like a more developed answer to some of this, but folks like Rob do. So that's just a plug, to stay tuned. Check out these events. By way of sending everyone off, I just want to say thank you again. These questions and comments were really, really rich, and I wish we had more time to sit and talk. But I hope we can do that following up, in Kentucky this summer and through other events. And lastly, Rob, feel free to share some of my contact info with folks. I'll try to stay in touch. And let's build the movement, right? Like, we've got the ideas. Let's make the movement happen.
All right, I will send a thank you email, and I can drop Eleanor's Gmail in that, if that sounds good. And I'll include the recording for this if anyone signed up didn't get a chance to come tonight. And thank you all so much. Thank you, Eleanor, and congratulations for publishing this excellent book. And yeah, I hope you all have a nice night as we try to think about how we can organize to overthrow the crazy world and remake a ecological and liberated society. So thanks a lot, everyone.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. And thank you again, everyone. This is really inspiring.
Yeah. All right, y'all.
Bye.
Good night.